For the last full panel of the day, we've got, I think, a really interesting set of presentations around the subject of enhancing UK nuclear skills across the civil and defence sectors. And we've got three really excellent presentations, and we should have plenty of time after the presentations to have Q&A, and we're going to aim to end, I think, at 5 to 5 so that we can move straight in to the last sessions of the day. So without further ado, can I ask Jacob and Jack to give us their double act?
So I'm Jack Kitsell. In my day job, I work for Rolls-Royce Submarines, but here I'm representing the Next Generation Nuclear Industry Council. And just as a disclaimer that's associated with that, which has been repeated throughout the day, the views I express are not necessarily those of my employer or anyone that I'm representing, but are very much my own thoughts and opinions.
Jacob Home, I'm a senior consultant in my day job at Freya, and likewise I'm here as a member of the Next Generation Nuclear Industry Council.
So we want to talk about two paths to 2050. That's the benchmark and the goalpost that's been set by government. That's the goalpost that's been set by legislation for hitting that net zero target. And we said there are two ways to that: continuing on the status quo or making some radical changes and delivering on our policy commitments. But before we go all the way forward to 2050, we want to go back to the beginning of the nuclear sector in the UK. The nuclear sector globally, not just uniquely to us, started as a joint civil-military enterprise. There was no distinction between the two. The civil programme furnished the defence one, and the defence one existed because of the civil programme. As time went on, and through successive governments and change, that started to diverge, and the two programmes became separate and distinct, with less and less communication and collaboration across the piece. As a consequence, you ended up with two very different programmes, two very different drum beats, to two very different sets of requirements. And as we go through to today, and we start looking at the commitments that are being made by government today in terms of expanding our UK nuclear fleet, in terms of civil nuclear power, but also in terms of delivering the future UK deterrent and other commitments in terms of AUKUS, we're having to start looking at realigning both of those programmes again, because at the moment they just don't work together in isolation. They don't work in isolation, they have to work together synergistically. And just by way of a bit of background, just to highlight, there's some key headlines on there, talking about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that we have ahead of us. The key bit, which I apologise, is hidden right at the bottom there for those of you who won't be able to see it. But there's a report from a Defence Select Committee from 2007, which basically says, and I'm going to quote this because I'll read this wrong, otherwise I'm sorry. Decisions on the future of the UK's nuclear deterrent should be taken on strategic needs of the country, not on industrial factors. However, whilst industrial considerations should not affect the substance of decisions, they will necessarily affect the timing of decisions. It is not unreasonable for the government to take these factors into account. And it's those strategic decisions and those industrial requirements that have routinely caused us problems and challenges that we think, through some clever decision making now and some close collaboration across both sides of the divide, both parts of the sector, that we can get some really good results.
So how did we go about conducting our research to form our conclusions and see what we could find? We looked at a number of other countries across the world, how they managed their civil industry, the level of state involvement and alignment in that country with its defence programme as well. Many of the usual suspects you'll see, and we found a lot of interesting similarities amongst some of the other players globally, and some of the good practices and bad that could be applied to the UK, or areas that we can avoid. We also looked at previous examples of collaboration between civil and defence in the UK. It has happened here before, it has happened quite successfully, such as the Orion laser facility at AWE and the Alpha Resilience and Capability Programme that is multi-company run, and recently had a lot of good success with setting the standards for glove boxes in the UK as a means of standardising requirements for glove boxes and showing that it can be done between the two different enterprises. We also talked and interviewed a number of nuclear professionals from both civil and defence, and from a variety of different levels in the civil industry, from supply chain up to the primes, and a number of young leaders as well as senior professionals as well. And finally, we did a literature review of the UK's stated policy intentions, where it plans to go, the road to 2050, the Defence Command paper, the AUKUS announcements as well as the more recent news about the potential closure of the Nuclear Advanced Research Manufacturing Centre. So, what did we find?
You standing there is really unhelpful.
Apologies.
I've got to, no, it's fine. I'm just going to try and remember what we wrote down. This has clearly been well practiced on my part. The crux of the matter is that there are three things that we've got to hit by 2050, which is national security, energy security, and net zero. Those are the three things that we have to hit, and nuclear can play either a massive or an insignificant part in that, and that is a decision that we collectively make and enable today. If we try and commit both of our objectives in terms of growing the civil and the defence programmes, we're likely to come under severe pressures to deliver both of those and severe restraints and constraints based on common supply chain enablement work which isn't existing, problems in terms of resourcing our fuel across both programmes, the skills programme, and some of the infrastructure that we need to be sharing and developing collaboratively across both sides of the divide. We have to change the way in which we view the civil enterprise. The defence enterprise is really, really good, and we will keep referring to it as the defence nuclear enterprise. It is an enterprise. We don't consider the individual so much, and it's considered as a whole ecosystem. The civil sector isn't seen in the same way. The civil sector is still very much divided and fragmented. And if we want the UK to thrive as a nuclear power, that has to change, and our capabilities have to be better aligned, much like our French colleagues or others, where the civil programme is a state endeavour. It's done by state companies. We've spoken about that in the context of Russia and China also today, where those programmes are massively aligned and joint rather than fragmented. And because they're seen as a strategic capability, they deliver good results. The Chinese, a paper that I was reading a while ago spoke about the fact that the Chinese programme went into remission almost in terms of delivering its nuclear capabilities in the early 2000s. But the government of the day decided that they wanted to keep the bare minimum credible that they could do in terms of continuing that civil programme, such that if they wanted to change the stance, if they wanted to increase nuclear production, they could, because they'd have the skill set, the supply chain and everything else ready for that. And as a consequence of making that strategic decision to maintain capabilities, they were able to grow that because they saw it as a strategic enterprise and as a national endeavour. I've mentioned, there's some more words that basically say what I've just said in probably fewer words. Sorry.
So what recommendations can we bring out of the findings that we found? So the first one, as Jack alluded to, is for the UK to treat its civil nuclear industry and its workforce as the strategic national asset that it functionally is, and to take a more aligned approach to prevent competition and cannibalisation between the primes within civil. And we see that done really well in countries like France, which is an excellent comparator for the UK in this, and they've shown that it can be done. And there are various ways that this could be done, either very centrally from government, perhaps as a Minister for Nuclear, or something more along the lines of a government industry collaboration through what was the Nuclear Industry Council, which hasn't met now for a number of years and could be reconstituted or something similar. Second, where existing civil defence collaboration is already happening, quite often in the supply chain, government industry should support that and not simply choose not to do it as an arbitrary decision and say, it's too difficult or it can't be done for various security or commercial reasons. We should take a pragmatic approach and say, why can't it be done? And really push where we can find those opportunities to collaborate. And thirdly, I think most of you will have heard of the Nuclear Skills Task Force that was set up a number of months ago now, and it was a very good example of the skills issue being elevated at the highest levels in the UK in a sort of burning platform issue. And then something was finally done about it. The Skills Task Force was implemented, they sprinted, created a strategy with that was then handed over to a delivery vehicle. There's the potential for something similar for civil defence collaboration to further explore some of the common enabling capabilities that we discovered as part of our research and take those forward to discover whether they can be of use and whether they're quick, easy wins or they require more and further research. So also that they should be tied in with a delivery vehicle. They can't just write the strategy and hand it over and put it out there. It has to be nominated to an entity or an organisation to actually deliver the impacts and benefits from this. So the four enabling capabilities that we found were... How's it going? Nope.
While we wait for the... Oh, there you go.
So to give the task force a head start, we've found a number of different common enabling capabilities, and we'll take you through the four that we think are the most challenging on skills, infrastructure, supply chain, and nuclear fuel.
Skills we won't speak on too much because the two other people that are presenting are doing a much better job about talking about that than we can. But the two key points to highlight about making sure that nuclear is reflected in the curriculum in the right places, and that doesn't mean putting it in the science curriculum, but so much as putting it in the primary school geography curriculum, teaching nuclear as a clean source of energy, as a viable source of energy, and not delving deep into the physics or the chemistry of it. That's a really important in terms of sort of planting those seeds early on in a young person's development to make sure that the nuclear sector is seen as something good, and then enabling that also for people further up in the sector by doing a mid-career rotation program and enabling people to transition between government, industry, academia, and rotating seamlessly across the three to make sure that best skills, knowledge, and practices are shared, and that we will benefit from a collective sort of joint-up skills approach.
Secondly, infrastructure. We will likely be building a lot of new submarines in the future. We'll likely be building a lot of civil nuclear power plants in the future. We have a lot of aging infrastructure that supports current projects, but will likely need to be either revitalised or rebuilt for the future programmes on both sides. And that's everything from a lot of the V&V, validation and verification activities, research reactors, material test reactors, post-radiation examination facilities, high-performance computing, thermal hydraulics. All these things are needed in order to design, build, operate, and validate future designs in the nuclear business on both sides.
In terms of supply chain, as we try and better align the defence and the civil programmes, we should try and aim for an end of the boom and bust cycle that we're seeing across the patch. That severely hampers our capability. The example that's given is that Sizewell B went online in 1995. The next new civil program plant is going to come on for another 35 years after that 1995 date. And there was a similar gap between the end of the Vanguard program and the Astute program in the defence worlds. So that inability to align ourselves up and maintain that strategic capability means that the supply chain atrophied in the time, the skill base atrophied. And so maintaining a minimal, credible growth in our sector means that the supply chain can better plan, and it can better prepare and support the program, and it also lowers overall cost rather than having to do everything as a first of a kind when we should be getting to nth of a type product.
And finally, nuclear fuel, which is always a classic one that comes up. As I said, more reactors, submarines or civil, will need more fuel. There's increased interest in advanced fuel types with HALEU and coated particle fuel manufacture, and there's a great opportunity to, instead of building two factories to service two enterprises, building a single factory or a single production route that can be used by both, and enacting joint research at the basic fundamental level will solve a lot of those issues and prevent us from duplicating effort. So those are the recommendations, and we did say that this presentation is titled Two Roads to 2050, and we will take you through it any moment now. Where am I pointing? There we go. So there are two paths ahead of us, and they both end at 2050, or perhaps go a bit beyond. And either we can take on board the recommendations of the task forces that will be set up and start to work more closely together as both enterprises along a single aligned national nuclear enterprise, or
we can continue with the status quo and continue with the fragmented and sort of split approach that we're having at the moment, which delays everything, makes things more expensive and more problematic. And so Jacob, being ever the optimist, is going to talk you through what a good version of 2050 looks like for the nuclear sector. I am far more cynical, borderline problematically so. And so I want to talk you through what I think 2050 could look like if we don't enact at least some of these recommendations. The truth is we'll probably land somewhere in the middle, but these are two extremes of the same outcome.
So we're going into the 2030s. We'll start to see the SMR projects that are currently with GBN start to go through their FID, start construction. We'll start to see work on Sizewell C as well. We'll see the first Dreadnought submarine on patrol. And if this all sounds like things that are already planned, that's because there is. These are the collaboration between civil and defence is likely to be full of a lot of quiet victories, where the working together of both enterprises de-risks both programmes, so allowing us to hit the policy ambitions and the goals that we've set ourselves. So it's really about enacting what we've said we will do and not competing against each other.
Whereas if we continue competing against each other and we don't align the common skill base, we don't fix the supply chain risk, we don't fix the commonality of things, you'll continue to find that there's a skill shortage that persists well beyond any predicted dates, and that skill shortage inevitably leads to raising wages, which in turn means that there's a rising cost for the nuclear program, and it becomes less and less economically viable and a less attractive option for government.
And then heading onto the road to 2050, we'll start to see a lot more expertise in both enterprises around delivery of big programs, major infrastructure, and hopefully see a more mobile and flexible workforce that can go between different large nuclear programs in the UK flexibly because of the aligned standards and the aligned qualifications. So really what we're seeing is the SMR fleet getting rolled out, taken on expertise or experience from the first-of-a-kind SMRs, as well as the productization of the AUKUS and the submarine rollout as well. Look at it more as a product line. And then equally, the GDF built as well, the collaboration and the communication between what was required for the defence industry and what was required for civil, coming together into a single facility. Whereas
in my view of the world, we get to the 2030s towards 2050 and Hinkley Point C joins the grid yet later and more over budget than it already is. The AUKUS programme starts to dissolve itself because of cost and delay. The Australians have already proven that they're willing to back out of a contract and back out of a commitment to deliver a submarine programme. They've done it with the French already because it wasn't going to the plan that they wanted. And so if we don't align our programmes and our skill base here in the UK and in the US to deliver that programme for that new customer, we risk them pulling out as well. And so this really golden opportunity to get foreign investment into UK nuclear could soon be taken away from us.
So finally we arrive at 2050, and in my vision it is a very aligned industry. We have people moving between civil and defence. They can use all those expertise and the knowledge that they've gained. They have very zigzag careers. That's not necessarily seen as a bad thing. There's a lot of information sharing between the major primes and all the supply chain, and government helps bring that together in a very in a shared environment where the best practice is recognised and then shared between all partners.
As in my view of the world, if we don't fix some of the problems that we've spoken about, we end up in 2050 where there's still competition for demand, there's still competition for skills and resources across both sectors, which massively inhibits our ability to deliver on both sets of commitments. That we end up having to delay CASD, or we end up having to break CASD because we're unable to sustain it, and that reaching national security, energy security, and net zero are all done, but either at greater expense than we currently need to, or without a nuclear involvement. And you end up with a position where we deliver the government's goals. The government has met its legal obligations to deliver net zero, but that the UK nuclear sector has died a death in the interim.
Great. Thank you very much. Who will start to answer part of that puzzle. Lydia, why don't you start?
Hi everyone, I'm Lydia Squires. I'm a mechanical engineer at AWE Nuclear Security Technologies, and today I'll be presenting on our infrastructure and resource challenges standing in the way of the UK's nuclear goals. Similar disclaimer to everyone else, the work and conclusions presented on my own and don't reflect AWE or the government. So I'd like to start by thinking about what are the UK's nuclear goals. So there is the target, which is shared with many across the world, of net zero carbon by 2050. And to meet this, the UK has developed the goal of 24 gigawatt nuclear capacity by 2050. Along with this, it comes energy independence. This has become particularly apparent, the importance of this has become particularly apparent over recent years. And having a strong nuclear energy within the UK will help towards this. As well as this, we have the continuous at-sea deterrent, a new fleet of submarines, as well as a new warhead programme. And all alongside this, we want to be developing new technologies, so future-proofing the UK beyond 2050 and becoming world leaders in this technology. I don't know about you, but these sound like some humongous goals to me. Huge, obscene really, to be doing all of this at the same time. And to be able to do this, you would need really strong, resilient plans. So let's think about where are we right now? What is the current UK capability? So currently we have 9 operational reactors at 5 plants and a 6.5 gigawatt capacity, so about a quarter of our 2050 goal. However, some of these plants are meant to be shutting down in the next decade, although we are building some new ones as well. And currently we have 15% of our electricity is generated from nuclear, which is, however, below the EU average. So, however, There have been in civil and defence some concerns regarding infrastructure and resource when it comes to meeting these goals. In particular, we have a 200,000 people skills gap which has been identified. These are all sorts of jobs at all sorts of levels within the civil and defence nuclear industry. In order to meet this gap, we'd have to find all of these people, train them, house them, and then maintain them throughout their careers and beyond. There was an aim to fill this gap domestically, if possible, or majority of it. And they also want to increase the percentage of women in defence and in nuclear. Furthermore, we have ageing nuclear infrastructure. As I said before, we've got many sites shutting down in the next decade, and we have lots of previously decommissioned sites. Furthermore, the defence infrastructure is also ageing, and a lot of money and investment is going into that currently to rebuild defence too. To rebuild all this infrastructure, you need many materials, resource, skills, and well-defined plans, all of which come at a great cost and takes a long time. We do, however, have lots of areas of nuclear knowledge within the country. On the map here, as well as the active and decommissioned sites, we've also identified a few examples of areas of nuclear capability, such as the nuclear arc. We've got Nuclear Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, I've got AWE in Harwell, and a few other places down there. These could be tapped into and expanded, so it's definitely good to bear in mind what we already have when we're thinking about how we want to build the future. So what has been done already and what are we planning on doing? The previous government has come up with a plan for combating the skills gap. The National Nuclear Strategic Plan for Skills has come up with some goals. I've listed a few here. So collaborating across the sector, deepening the workforce pool, investment in existing workforce, and to lead and steward for the long term. These sound great, these sound really good, very positive, a step in the right direction. And we've even seen I've found an example of one of the measures they're taking to combat this. So we have the National College for Nuclear looking at degrees and apprenticeships, and these sites are located by existing areas of nuclear capability. However, considering we have a 200,000 people skills gap, are we doing enough? Are there enough initiatives? There's a lot of work on apprenticeships and degrees, but what about people later in their career? What about other sorts of jobs where you don't need a degree, perhaps? So the scale of the plans was not quite how I personally had envisioned them for a 200,000 people skills gap, although I'm sure there's still more to come. A case study I'd like to look at when I'm thinking now about infrastructure is Hinkley Point C. So it's a great initiative, 2 reactors in Somerset, a 3.2 gigawatt capability, with enough to power 6 million homes. However, as everyone I'm sure knows, there's been huge delays in this project and rising costs. Seems to be for a variety of reasons, one of which is having to change design to meet regulations, leading to an increase in materials and therefore cost and time. Along with this, we've then had some bad press with this. It hasn't given the public the best view of large-scale nuclear projects, especially when it comes to the rising costs and the use of the public money. However, what the press often forget is this is the first plant that we've built in decades. So it has brought back nuclear skills to the UK, to the area. And it's been a real experience for the industry to learn how to build plants again and to think about how they want to build them in the future. And from this, there's been a predicted efficiency increase of 20 to 30% on any future plants which are built because of the lessons that have been learned from Hinkley. So there is definitely hope for the future. despite the delays and costs in this project. Something else that's always would be nice to mention as well is small modular reactors. So they generate up to 300 megawatts of electricity, and this technology could be used to help meet the goals. So the benefits of these reactors could reduce the resource and infrastructure burdens on of the UK. Some of the benefits that would help include flexibility for location. We could tap into smaller talent pools across the UK. Lower capital investment. This was also be looked kindly upon by the general public who've heard about all the rising nuclear costs. And reduced construction schedules as well, which can also help in flexibility, so we can adapt our plans as we go along. However, when it comes to SMRs, it seems to be quite a way off still, with no fixed plans on investment yet. Still got quite a way off for the decisions to be made. So, what should the future look like for the new government in terms of nuclear? To reach their goal of 24 gigawatt nuclear capacity by 2050, they will need robust facility and enabling plans. I would suggest that decisions on construction plans for the next 30 years are developed now to the best of our ability. These plans can be made flexible and they can be adapted as we learn over time, but I think having a plan and starting now for the plants that are in for the future will help us to plan better for when it comes to skills and resource. It's also important to learn from what we've done in the past. We need to make sure that we are learning from Hinkley and learning from projects like that, so then we have smoother projects in the future, and it'll be the key to improving construction and improving efficiency. We need to make sure our enabling plans when it comes to resource are focused at all levels and all sorts of roles, so we have the right people available when it comes to needing the plants. So despite infrastructure and resource challenges, with careful planning and targeted investment, these challenges can be overcome. The key is to act now, don't delay, pick a choice and stick with it. Build up talent and learn as we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Lydia, thank you very much indeed. And for our last presentation, Freya, please.
So, afternoon, everyone. I'll be springboarding on a number of topics brought up by my fellow panellists, and specifically, I'll be looking at the engineering skills gap in defence nuclear. So, the skills going into defence nuclear need to significantly increase if we're going to meet the demands of this growing and critical industry. It's predicted that by 2030, we'll need over 40,000 engineers across nuclear as a step increase, and a significant amount will need to be funneled straight into defence. The NNSPS are a group who've done a lot of great work in this, as has been discussed, and they split this skills need into two groups. Nuclear skills, which are nuclear specific, such as nuclear engineers, and then skills for nuclear, so conventional skills, more widely available, however the rest of the industry compete for these, including mechanical or civil engineers. And unfortunately, there are challenges to recruiting into defence, engineering and nuclear independently, and that means that the defence nuclear engineering area suffers from all of these stacked up. It's not just a case of getting more engineers to come towards the industry, there simply aren't enough to go round. One cross-sector survey showed that 50% of employers are expecting to see issues employing into engineering roles in the future. And then to nuclear, some people in this room may know that there's a relatively small talent pool. You'll see the same faces from project to project. And this talent pool is under serious threat of knowledge loss due to retirement. Again, it's predicted that recruitment into nuclear needs to double in the future. And then to defence. So vacancies have consistently increased across the years across defence, from 12,000 in 2015 to almost 40,000 today. Many industries will look to partially fill the engineering skills gap with AI. Up to 30% of an engineer's hours are expected to be impacted by this in the future. However, the safety of nuclear and the security of defence means there will be limitations on how far we can push AI. Again, we're further in need of that people capability. So first, I'll look to understanding the skills gap so we can properly address it. And if we look to engineering, if we're to fill the engineering skills gap, we have to utilise the entire talent pool. And that means we need a workforce which reflects the diverse world that we live in. So I've focused on one particular group where the population by far outweigh the representation in industry, and that's women in engineering. Under 16% of the STEM workforce in defence nuclear are female, due to a number of reasons, some more intricate and some even unconscious. The first I've got here is inflexible work norms, due to a male normative workforce which don't foster work-family balances. Then imposter syndrome, so feelings of inadequacy, and this is common in all workplaces. However, female engineers suffer from this at 20% higher rates than their male counterparts. And then the Paula principle, which is a relatively new term being coined to explain why women tend to be overqualified and under-promoted in the workforce, explaining why less women hold positions of leadership. Then there's that bias that women and girls see when they look towards the industry. This impacted me very directly when I was choosing my degree. It did make me very nervous that all of a sudden I knew I'd become a minority. But many girls don't even get that far. As soon as they become aware of the wider working world, they develop that unconscious bias that drives them away from STEM. So this creates somewhat of a chicken and an egg scenario. There's that underrepresentation in industry. Women and girls don't see themselves reflected when they look to industry, and then they don't feel empowered to join industry. And the underrepresentation continues. And then, if we look to nuclear, so there's a strong public perception that nuclear sits behind a wall of technical, complex background nuclear knowledge. We've already talked about these skills for nuclear roles, where that's not required. People's existing experience and their transferable skills make them invaluable to a nuclear project. However, if you're not in the industry, you don't know this. And there are some roles which you can become nuclearised on the job, and some levels of retraining are all you need. Many here will know that retraining is often available on the job, and you can become nuclearised once taking up a role. But again, if you're not in the industry, you don't know this. And then we'll look to defence. Now, the first thing I'll mention is that defence is almost never mentioned in education, and defence nuclear even less so. It's simply not a part of the conversation, and the engineers of tomorrow don't understand what the industry can offer them. Then a significant theme across defence is security, and that can impact the skills gap in a number of ways. I've split these into primary and secondary. The primary being those inherent to working in a secure industry, and secondary being the knock-on impacts of that we might be able to mitigate. So primary include some projects can have intrusive security checks, and that can discourage people, and some projects can have nationality restrictions, again decreasing that talent pool. And then to secondary, and due to security, some parts of defence can be shrouded in a level of mystery, and that means people outside the industry don't have visibility of the interesting work available, and they don't have visibility of the skills required in the industry. Again, speaking as a process or a chemical engineer, I wasn't aware that there was extensive and interesting work available for me until I joined the industry. There we go. So from everything I've mentioned there, it's clear that the skills gap is a function of a number of moving parts. There's no one quick fix, and we're going to need real cross-industry collaboration to address this. Luckily, as we've mentioned, there's some great work underway in recent years to do this. So first, the NNSPS, that's the National Nuclear Strategic Plan for Skills. And this map here shows the 10-year plan to move through the skills gap across all roles throughout nuclear. And that was announced in 2024, with key industry partners being Babcock with Cavendish Nuclear, BAE, Rolls-Royce and EDF. And then the destination nuclear. And they've done a great job making a one-stop shop for everything nuclear, for everyone looking to move into the industry, from job postings to information about the industry. And I'll present a number of pathways through the skills gap which fit into the themes identified by the NNSPS, as well as presenting a number of specific activities that any organisation at any level can do to help towards the skills gap. So first, we'll look at increasing engagement with engineering. And again, I focus this at women in engineering. So we have to stop that cycle of underrepresentation. We can do this through a number of ways. Increasing visibility is one. That can be through STEM outreach. It can be through social media drives. But it's really important that STEM outreach is focused at children as young as possible, much before A-levels, and that's at primary school age. And that's because we need to destroy a stereotype in a child's mind before it forms. And then striving for equity in the workplace to retain the women that are already in the industry. Again, there's a number of ways we can do this. One way is embracing agile working to foster those family work balances. Another way is appointing female mentors or champions to provide a level of community in the industry and for somewhere for women to go to ask that important advice to help them move up through engineering. And then to engineers moving into defence nuclear. So again, we have to attract that talent. As I mentioned before, some parts of defence can be shrouded in mystery, so we have to show people what they're missing out on. So wherever possible, promote interesting work at technical forums, from conferences, journals, even LinkedIn, wherever security allows. And if we can engage with non-nuclear forums, we're going to widen that reach a long way. And then reduce barriers, so people find it easy to move into the industry. So we can do this through stressing where that background nuclear technical knowledge is not required, either because it's a skills for nuclear role or because training is available on the job. Again, the Destination Nuclear have done some great work here, making an accessible platform for people just one click and they can see everything available to them. But we still have to get rid of that stereotype around nuclear that's driving people away from making that click. Again, a number of ways to do this. Whilst I was researching for this presentation, I read a number of job postings for these skills for nuclear roles, and you'd be amazed at the number of times you can see the word nuclear in a number of paragraphs. We have to write job postings that are aimed at everyone, otherwise we're cutting that talent pool down ourselves. And then there's embracing training. So we have to foster a real culture of on-the-job learning and continued knowledge sharing. There's some great external training providers out there, but we also have to make the most of internal subject matter experts. Allow these people to spend some of their working time creating training material for the wider business, for them to take on apprentices. But there will be some individuals who will not look to make that jump into nuclear until they've done some training of themselves. The training that I mentioned is often aimed at the business level. We need to make sure there's accessible training out there for an individual to access. We can partner with governing bodies such as the ICME or the IMechE and create low-cost nuclear training opportunities. And then finally, a key resource for any industry is early careers. The NNSPS have rolled out plans to double the number of apprentices and graduates and quadruple the number of PhD students coming in across nuclear. But again, we have to attract that talent, so we get those high-quality candidates coming towards the industry. We can do this by incorporating an awareness of defence into existing nuclear modules at education, bring it into the conversation. We can do this through either technical or even policy knowledge incorporated into modules. And then promoting the impactful work available in defence nuclear and the job satisfaction that can come along with that. And finally, we can promote these skills for nuclear roles by including nuclear matter in conventional modules. For one example, if you've got a heat transfer module, have a heat exchanger problem based in a nuclear-powered submarine. And then finally, reducing barriers. So that's similar to the slide before. We have to make sure that everyone is aware that the defence nuclear industry is for everyone, training will be provided, and you will be continuously supported to succeed in the defence nuclear industry. That's some references, and thank you very much.